For years, the war in Ukraine has been a battlefield not just of soldiers, but of technology, secrecy, and shocking twists that no one could have predicted. Russia believed it had already calculated every move Kiev could make. Yet one weapon, born in the frozen north of Europe, suddenly appeared on the horizon. A weapon so advanced, so unexpected, that even Vladimir Putin himself could hardly believe Sweden would dare to hand it over. That weapon was the Saab JAS-39 Gripen, a fighter jet designed not to flaunt power, but to outsmart it. And now, with Ukraine at the center of global attention, this jet threatened to change the balance of the war in ways no one saw coming. The Gripen was never just another fighter jet. It was created by Sweden during the Cold War with one chilling reality in mind: survival against the Soviet Union. Unlike the expensive American F-35s or the heavy Russian Sukhois, the Gripen was built for speed, adaptability, and independence. It could take off from highways, refuel quickly, and launch deadly precision strikes with minimal support. Sweden had spent decades perfecting this machine in silence. But now, its most guarded secret was being passed into the hands of Ukraine. Rumors swirled through European defense circles, whispers of shipments moving at night, and quiet agreements sealed in back rooms of NATO meetings. To the outside world, nothing seemed confirmed. But inside the Kremlin, panic began to spread. What truly unsettled Russia wasn't just the arrival of new aircraft. It was the philosophy behind the Gripen. Unlike the massive and costly American systems, the Gripen was cheap to operate, easy to maintain, and deadly in combat. A country under siege like Ukraine could keep these jets flying, while Russian aircraft, weighed down by costs and logistical nightmares, slowly crumbled. The Gripen could fight in the shadows, using electronic warfare to blind radars, slipping through defenses, and striking targets before Russian pilots even knew what had happened. For the first time since the war began,
the first Gripen jets arrived in secrecy. Transported in crates, hidden under cover of night, they were assembled piece by piece on Ukrainian soil. Only a handful of trusted engineers and pilots knew the full truth. To outsiders, these were whispers, rumors, ghost sightings in the sky. But then, one night, radar operators on the Russian front lines reported something they had never seen before. A blip appeared, vanished, reappeared on another frequency, and then was gone. A moment later, an ammunition depot deep inside occupied territory exploded in a fireball. The Russians scrambled to understand what had just happened. The signature didn't match American jets, nor European ones. It was something else, something faster, something designed to slip through unseen. Putin's advisors were stunned. They had spent years mocking the Gripen as a budget jet, calling it inferior to the mighty Sukhois and the stealthy American F-35. But now, in the skies over Ukraine, it was showing its true colors. This wasn't a showpiece fighter. It was a survival machine, honed for moments exactly like this. Every hour it remained airborne, Russia's air defenses looked weaker, its pilots more exposed. Even worse, the Gripen came armed with Meteor missiles, long-range, beyond visual range weapons that could strike enemy aircraft before they even knew they were targeted. For Russian pilots, the skies that once felt safe now became a hunting ground where they were the prey.
What made the situation unbearable for Moscow was the realization that Sweden hadn't just given Ukraine planes. It had given them a system. Training, maintenance, spare parts, and electronic warfare tools quietly accompanied the deal. NATO allies provided intelligence, Sweden provided the hardware, and Ukrainian pilots provided the courage. Piece by piece, a puzzle came together, one that spelled disaster for Russia's air strategy. Putin, angry, raged behind closed doors, demanding answers. How could tiny Sweden, long dismissed as neutral and harmless, suddenly shift the balance of a war he had staked everything on? The truth was painful. While Russia burned resources, the Kremlin went into denial. State media dismissed the reports as lies, claiming the Su-35 had crashed due to technical faults. But inside military command centers, generals knew the truth. They had been outmatched. For the first time since the invasion, Russia faced an enemy with air capabilities strong enough to challenge their dominance. The Gripen wasn't just a fighter jet, it was a symbol. It showed the world that Ukraine was no longer a passive recipient of aid, but an active, evolving force capable of wielding cutting-edge technology. And it showed Russia that even small nations like Sweden could play a decisive role in shaping the outcome of the war. Whispers spread within NATO too. Some questioned how far Sweden was willing to go, whether this bold move might drag the alliance deeper into confrontation. Others quietly applauded. The United States, locked in debates over sending F-16, watched closely as the Gripen demonstrated that cheaper, more efficient solutions could sometimes achieve more. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, morale soared. Pilots who had once flown aging Soviet-era jets now found themselves at the controls of some of the most advanced machines in the world. For them, this wasn't just about survival. It was about hope. Yet with hope came danger. The Russians began hunting for the Gripens with everything they had. Missiles, spies, electronic jamming. All were deployed to find and destroy the jets before they could tilt the war too far. But each attempt ended in failure. The Gripen's systems adapted, dodged, and evaded. Its pilots grew bolder, striking supply lines, communication hubs, and air bases once thought safe. Every time a target exploded, rumors grew stronger. The Swedes had given Ukraine something that Russia had no answer for. And every time Putin asked his generals for solutions, they came back with silence. By now, the legend of the Gripen had taken on a life of its own. Ukrainians spoke of it as a phantom protector. Russians whispered of it with fear. And analysts around the world dissected every move it made. Was this truly the beginning of a new era in warfare? Could a single jet, born of Sweden's quiet defiance, reshape? But the real shock had yet to come. Behind closed doors, NATO and Sweden were preparing something even bigger. The Gripens delivered to Ukraine were not just ordinary models. They were enhanced, modified with special upgrades never before revealed. New radar systems, stealth coatings, and advanced jamming pods gave them capabilities that even some NATO members had never tested. Ukraine wasn't just receiving jets. It was becoming a proving ground for the next generation of aerial warfare. And the results were terrifying. In one operation, Ukrainian Gripens infiltrated Russian airspace undetected, mapping defense networks and feeding data back to NATO in real time. It was a move so bold, so unthinkable, that Russian generals nearly refused to believe it. But the evidence was undeniable. Their own radars had been blinded, their systems disrupted, and their defenses compromised. For Putin, this was the nightmare scenario. Not only was Ukraine striking back, but every strike revealed the weakness of Russian systems to the entire world. Allies and enemies alike were watching, learning, and recalculating their strategies. The balance of power in the skies had shifted. Suddenly, nations long hesitant to support Ukraine saw an opportunity. If Sweden's Gripen could prove so effective, perhaps others would step in too. Offers of drones, missiles, and intelligence began to flow more freely. What had started as a secret delivery now became a catalyst for an international shift. Russia, once feared as untouchable, was bleeding credibility by the day. Each Gripen sortie was not just a military mission, but a political statement. Ukraine was not alone, and the world was willing to defy Moscow. Yet with every victory came a haunting question. How would Putin respond? He had already gambled everything on this war. His pride, his power, his future, all tied to Ukraine. To admit that Swedish jets were humiliating his forces was unthinkable. But to continue losing was worse. As the Gripens circled above the battlefield, the world waited for the inevitable reaction.
In the final reckoning, the Gripen became more than a jet. It became a story, a myth, a symbol of defiance. For Ukraine, it meant survival, resilience, and a glimpse of victory. For Sweden, it was a declaration that neutrality no longer meant silence in the face of aggression. And for Russia, it was a humiliation, a reminder that even the mightiest powers could be humbled by the quiet resolve of smaller nations. The world had underestimated Sweden, underestimated Ukraine, and overestimated Russia's ability to control the skies. In the shadows of war, the Gripen emerged as a legend, rewriting rules, defying expectations, and shocking even the most powerful leaders. Putin may have refused to believe it, but the truth was undeniable. Sweden had given Ukraine a weapon that changed everything. And as the smoke rose over battlefields, one chilling thought lingered in every mind, from Kyiv to Stockholm to Moscow. This was only the beginning. What else lay hidden in Sweden's arsenal? What other secrets waited to emerge from the silence of the North? If the Gripen was the first shock, the world could only imagine what might come next.